Uh, Today is Wednesday, July 6th, 2022, and I am very happy to welcome you to today's edition of Broadband Breakfast Live Online. I'm streaming from Orem, Utah. I'm in the Business Resource Center of Utah Valley University, and obviously we've been able to stream from wherever. Most of the time I'm based in Washington, D.C., where Broadband Breakfast is based. And over the past couple of weeks and going forward the next couple of weeks, most of our episodes of Broadband Breakfast Live Online will be from locations outside of Washington. We're going to focus on a lot of different states. We've called this the Summer of Broadband, and today we're focusing and have planned to focus for some time now on the Digital Equity Planning Grants Program. These applications are due July 12th, 6 days from now. So we've wanted to slip this in beforehand and talk a little bit about this, but also talk about how it fits into the broader stream of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and in particular, the Digital Equity Act that was included in IIJA. I'm joined by a great guest who will walk us through some aspects of her state's involvement in the planning grant process. But before I introduce her, I wanted to say just a few more words about both Broadband Breakfast and about the IIJA and its use of the planning grant process. The first thing I wanted to say is we're going to be talking with state officials in different states over the next couple of weeks. We've got planned another event here in Utah next week. We'll be venturing to other nearby states as well in the coming weeks. And don't miss our session where we're going to talk about valuing your business for the purpose of the capital match provisions of the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Act program. But today, again, we're going to focus a little bit earlier, or maybe just a little orthogonal to the main program of the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, in focusing on digital equity planning grants. The other thing I wanted to say is give a shout out to all of the sponsors of Broadband Breakfast. We appreciate them. We would not be able to do these programs every week that we do. So on behalf of our sponsors, which include Utopia Fiber, Broadband.money, Broadband Now, Lightbox, Ookla, Pinpoint Capital Advisors, Powerhouse Management, Positron Access, Samsung, California Emerging Technology Fund. We thank each of our sponsors for their participation. And as I said, Broadband Breakfast, we're a news entity. We focus on the news of broadband infrastructure, broadband's impact, as well as big tech and the controversies around privacy, Section 230 and the like. But today, as in many weeks over the past 8 months, 10 months, we've been focusing on the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Now, IIJA is, of course, part of the it is the name of the bipartisan infrastructure law that passed Congress last November. It actually passed the Senate a little bit shy of a year ago, August. And then passed the House November 6th. And this bipartisan measure, which was passed with a very healthy bipartisan vote of, I believe it was 69 in favor to 30 opposed in the Senate. So truly enjoyed very significant support from both Democrats and Republicans, and it included $65 billion for broadband. Now, that's not the sum in total. There's more in other appropriation measures through the Treasury Department, through the USDA, Department of Agriculture, and others. But the IIJA definitely provides a very, very significant amount of funding that we haven't seen in other vehicles. The core of the IIJA is the BEAD program, or the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment. I will call it BEAD from because that is the easiest way to recall it. And BEAD is, again, it's the big deal. The 42.5 billion is going to dramatically, or has the potential to dramatically impact connectivity in this country. And the consensus is it's just not going to be available until the end of next year, if not early 2024, because there's a multi-step process in which the FCC is going through a mapping process that's just kicked off, in which carriers are providing mapping data. The FCC is going to crunch that data. There's going to be challenge processes, and then the states will be awarded particular sums that they can then pass out as subgrants through their BEAD implementation process. But I do venture to say that Congress decided it wanted to do a couple things first, okay? Besides making sure the mapping got done first, it wanted to put in a planning process. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the digital equity planning grants. Now, I do have some, I'm just going to share a PDF that I have on my screen. So just give me a moment while I make sure I can share the right screen. And here we go. This is the digital, this is an overview prepared by the NTIA. So we know it's official, so to speak. And I'm just going to make sure the view is full screen here so that you all can see this as best as possible. So this is the looks like it's not, let's go back. Here we go. All right. Hopefully you're seeing the screen. Let me know if there are any challenges in seeing the screen. But this is the Bipartisan Infrastructure Laws Digital Equity Planning Grant. Looks like I am having problems sharing this. So just bear with me one moment while I try to adjust the share. Okay, let's try one more time. All right, looks like you can see it now. So Digital Equity Act, technically it was a separate measure, right? This was a approximately $3 billion sum of funds that was considered and was in some ways rolling along even without the passage of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. But with the passage of IIJA, the Digital Equity Act was included. And it has effectively three programs in one. It has the first program, a state planning program. That's what we're going to be focused on today. It has a second program, the State Capacity Program. That's a $1.44 billion formula grant. And it has a third program, the Competitive Program, which is $1.25 billion. And so the first two of these, the planning grant, that's the one that's due July 12th, and the state capacity programs, these are going to be submitted by the state broadband offices. So that's why our guest and other state broadband officials are really crucial to this process. All right, please make sure to mute your screen if you're not one of our presenters. Okay, no problem. So that's just the background for the Digital Equity Act's provisions that deal with the planning grant. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our guest for the program here today. Let me go ahead and change our view so we can all see Amy. Oh, did you pronounce it Elboar?
Elboar.
Elboar. Okay, wonderful. Amy, thank you so much for being with us here today. Amy is joining us from the state of Ohio, and Amy is the Deputy Chief of Grants and Special Projects with Broadband Ohio, and has been there for a year and a half, which is an eternity in IIJA terms, and oversees the state's residential broadband expansion grant program. And before Broadband Ohio, she worked with the Ohio Commission on Minority health. So Amy, go ahead and tell us a little bit about Broadband Ohio, about yourself, and then after that, we'll kind of go back into the planning grant process, deadlines, and details, okay?
Sure. So good afternoon or good morning, everyone. I'm Amy Elborn, the Deputy Chief of Grants and Special Projects for Broadband Ohio. Broadband Ohio is an office within the Ohio Department of Development. We were born out of the DeWine Houston administration, put out a study in 2019, the Ohio Broadband Strategy. And one of the objectives and goals from that strategy from 2019 was to stand up a state broadband office. So our office was created in March of 2020. So my chief likes to joke that, you know, he was a one-man show, came into the office, and then a couple days later was sent home because of the pandemic. So we have spent the last year and a half standing up various pilot projects to include telehealth projects and then community connectivity projects, and also getting our school districts connected and the students connected during the COVID-19 pandemic. So, and then finally, we got our state residential grant program stood up in the last year, and we gave out awards in March of this year. And we gave out about $243 million in grant funding, and direct impact that'll be 43,000 households will receive internet access in about 30 counties in Ohio. So we've been super busy, and you know, very lucky that we have the support of the DeWine Houston administration, and really the goals of the vision of the broadband strategy and of Broadband Ohio is to make high-speed internet affordable and accessible to all Ohioans, no matter where they live. And part of that is going after all of this, you know, historic infrastructure dollars, and specifically digital equity planning grant.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. And so in some ways, it sounds like, what year was the program stood up? Was it 2019 or was it?
So 2020 was, the office was created in 2020.
Because of the pandemic, or had it already been?
No, it had prior, the study was done in 2019. And so one of the objectives out of the strategy was to create a broadband office. So it just happened to be the timing.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the bipartisanship of broadband, and you know, there's a last count, I think it was approximately 40 states, it may have gone up or down, that have already submitted their letters of intent to participate in the program. Obviously, Ohio was one of the first, Amy, to put that letter of intent in. Those letters are due on July 18th, right? Just a little bit after what we're talking about here today. But you got your letter in right away. You know, do you think that, I mean, obviously Governor DeWine is a Republican. Do you think there's any concern that some quote red states might not put in their letters of intent and might not participate? What's your view as you look at this issue, Amy, and the politics of broadband?
Sure. So you know, like I said, we have the full support of the DeWine Houston administration, and he very quickly identified our office for the BEAD letter of intent funding. So you know, I kind of stay out of the political side of it, being the deputy chief of grants. I don't get too involved in kind of the political side of it, but I know that just from being on, you know, NTIA calls with other states, you know, I can't speak specifically for specific administrations, but I know the folks that are, you know, running these programs are super excited, eager to get their letters of intent in, and eager to, you know, get going. But I'm unsure of where other states are at this point. I know there's a lot to go. You know, some people might think it's easy just to get someone to sign off on a letter of intent, but it's not that easy, right? There's a lot of channels and people to go through. So it's just lucky for us. It was a little easier than it's probably being for some other states right now.
Well, absolutely, and don't mean to rope you into politics where you don't want to be. Peter Voderberg, the chief of the Broadband Ohio, was unable to join, but thank you for graciously agreeing to step in instead. And let's dive in a little bit to the application that you've put forward. So So shifting gears from the BEAD program and the BEAD deadline that we've referenced here, the July 18th deadline, Monday, July 18th. Let's talk now about this deadline of next Tuesday, the 12th. And I've got a link on the page for this event to a story about your application. I haven't put the application itself, but let's talk a little bit about this process. So now this is a $60 million national process, and the NTIA's Notice of Funds Opportunity for the Digital Equity Planning Grant that they put out on May 13th included amounts for each state, and of course for Ohio it put in amount of $1,470,550.76. Have you figured out how they got that exact number, Amy?
So I know there was actually a challenge process that we could have submitted a letter saying, you know, we're unhappy with this dollar amount. But after being on the webinars, and the feds did a really good job with explaining of how they came up with census data and all of that. So we were pretty comfortable with their formulas. So we didn't have a problem with it.
Well, and again, since we want to drill in a little bit to the details here, I do have another screen that I'm going to share. This is, it's called the Digital Equity Act Viewer. And this is what NTIA has put out. I will put the link to this URL in the chat window as well as on the web page. And so this page here has got each of the 50 states are demonstrated here. And I've clicked on Ohio here. You have a population of 11.6 million. You have a covered population of 8,968,000. And this is the formula that I understand is being used with different factors, that namely percent in households with certain high thresholds of income, of low income, of high age, higher age, veterans, disabilities, and so forth. And then they've got a percent in households lacking fixed broadband availability, percent in households lacking computer or broadband subscription, percentage not using the internet, and percentage not using a PC or a tablet computer. So they're basically using this as a formula to divine the magic number, which is, of course, in the relative scheme of things, a very small number, just 1.4 million. And this is for a planning grant that you will do. And this is what we want to talk about now. What is it that the planning grant will enable Ohio to do, will enable Broadband Ohio to do in preparation for BEAD and for the next stage of the Digital Equity Act process? Amy.
So first and foremost, we are an office of 5 right now, hoping to be an office of 6. So this funding will help us hire on a manager of digital equity and inclusion. So someone who will, from here on out, once they are onboarded, will help with the planning grant process, and then looking towards the capacity grant program. And additionally with that, I think in Ohio, we're lucky because we know that a lot of this work is being done already. And so our goal is to convene at the state level, a consortium of folks from all over the state who are already doing this work, sitting down with them and saying, okay, what are the barriers that you're seeing to digital equity, digital literacy in your neighborhoods, in your communities, in your counties? And then really doing some needs assessments from there. And then our plan is to then break out regionally into stakeholder groups. So we'll have 5 regions. So we'll start out with a statewide group and then break out into 5 regions. And because, you know, my background is grassroots community work. So we know really the people on the ground doing the work are the ones that really know what the issues are, and, you know, have the relationships with the nonprofits, the schools, all these groups that are already working with what the feds are considering covered populations. So we're really going to try to drill down to the grassroots level and create 5 regional groups to really get down to figuring out what the barriers are and then creating a plan from all of that data that we collect.
Mm-hmm. Let's go ahead and pause the share here, but continue our conversation. So, Amy, how would you say Broadband Ohio's plans have changed as the IIJA has gone through the process? In other words, you were clearly created before this was, a figment in anyone's imagination. Although we were, as I, again, particularly before the pandemic, right? But as the pandemic sort of got into this long grinding phase, we started to really appreciate how important higher capacity broadband was. And so that in turn drove a lot of the thinking behind IIJA. But in terms of Broadband Ohio, what was your vision? How was your vision changed and adapted as this tsunami of federal funding is making its way to the states, including to your office?
Sure. So I think kind of going back to our state grant. So we had a timeline mandated by legislation that we had to get our state grant program off the ground. So for the last really most of 2021, that was kind of our focus. And we had blinders on really going in with that. And we're like, okay, we have to stand this program up. We have timelines. We have to meet legislative deadlines. So that was really kind of our focus. But I think that with, the goal of Broadband Ohio, just because there's all this money out there, isn't really going to change, right? We want affordable, accessible, high-speed internet to all Ohioans. And so this is really, a good thing that we have this money coming, because we look forward to helping this, just another mechanism to help achieve our goal of achieving high-speed internet for all Ohioans. But I think that that the state broadband grant program, started our accessibility to high-speed internet. And now with the IIJA funding, we can really focus on the affordability piece as well and the adoption piece.
So your application, we've got a question here from one of our participants here about, are the letters of intent filed by states public? I got this from a listserv that I'm a part of, but I'd be happy to post it on the site if it's public document, Amy.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it is a public document. I think if, NTIA was FOIA'd right now, they would probably release it. So yeah, we haven't posted it just because we don't really have a place for it on our website.
Well, the reason I was so happy you agreed to join us is because there may still be states that are in the process of doing this application. You've done it, you submitted it, a week or so early, and this is not a huge lift, this application, right? I mean, this is roughly 8-page document that I have here. Do you want to just talk a little bit about the specifics of the document, the synopsis, the narrative, the budget, et cetera?
Sure. So it's NTIA created their own kind of grants portal. So it's a little different from if you've applied to like a grants.gov, but you have your standard SF 424 forms. That's just general contact information, state information, that kind of stuff. And then the budget, we had not a lot of characters to submit our narrative. So we really had to just kind of give a high level overview. And it's really of what we said we were going to do. And it's just kind of overview of, hey, this is where the state's at as far as lack of high-speed internet. I talked a little bit about how Cleveland is one of the least connected major cities in the United States. And then, so each of our different regions, and that's, an affordability issue. And then you go down to Appalachia, Ohio, and I talk about the need for high-speed internet in a village that's very rural, and that is more of an accessibility issue. So I kind of just painted the picture of what it looks like for Ohio. I talked about how we're going to hire a digital inclusion, digital equity and inclusion manager, and then just really talking about that statewide consortium of just trying to get people in the same room that are doing this type of work, but all over the state, and just trying to, get their information figure out what they're doing, getting the data behind what they're doing. And then we're really gonna go and break out into the 5 regions and kind of localize what work is being done in Ohio and creating a plan. And really our budget is, it's not too complicated. It's really personnel and then what they categorize as other, and that will be the funding that'll go towards the statewide group and then the regional groups as well.
Mm-hmm. Will those be part of the of Broadband Ohio, or will they be separate institutions or separate personnel that are?
So we already have, so it'll be separate. They won't be part of, it'll just be like kind of like a stakeholder group convening. We already have some groups that meet throughout the state of Ohio, like Franklin County, which is Columbus. There's a Franklin County Digital Equity Coalition. So like I said, we already know that there are groups that are working on this kind of information. It's just never been convened at a statewide level.
Right, right. As our viewers will know, I had the opportunity to participate in a state broadband office 1.0, right? The last go round with the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. I was the head of Broadband Illinois in a nearby state, and we actually did mapping, we did planning. And we had we called them E-teams, right? We had a group of effectively similar to what you're talking about, 5 groups or areas of the state. We broke it down a little bit. We had 8 E-teams total. And those different groups, sometimes they were led by a agriculture extension office, right? Sometimes they were led by, a Chamber of Commerce. We had staffers on our team who liaised and worked with these people. But it sounds like there's something similar going on. Do you have anything else you'd like to add about these 5 regional groups and what you hope the end goal will be, what role they'll have in the other IIJA processes?
Sure. So definitely, and there's been a lot of part of a talk about, the digital equity plan is not just going to be on its own on an island. It's going to definitely be part of our BEAD funding applications and our middle mile application. So we're really looking to create a holistic approach with what comes out of this planning dollars. And I think, and this is a very new concept for us. And I think once we get our new staffer onboarded, that person will really help us kind of parse through everything. But I mean, the goal is to really just get written down, because we don't necessarily have this in Ohio. And I think this is the case for a lot of states. Like I said, we know this work is being done, but we don't know what's exactly being done. And we have, the 8 covered populations. The feds are very specific on that. And so really drilling down into those 8 specific covered populations and what work is being done in those communities. And then looking at the data, looking at the mapping and saying, okay, like this is what we think. We know that it's not going to be a one size fits all approach, because like I said, our regions are very different. We have different issues for each region. So kind of coming together with a plan that's comprehensive, but that also addresses the different needs in different regions.
Let's just take a minute to go back over those quote covered populations, because I kind of glided over that a little bit earlier. I'm assuming, if I'm understanding correctly, these are these groups that are listed on the map. Households with incomes at or below 150% of the poverty level, so low income, age 60 or over, incarcerated, veterans, people with disabilities, people with a language barrier, racial or ethnic minorities, and rural. Those are 8.
Yeah,
Have I got those right?
Those are the 8 covered populations, correct?
So what does that mean? What does a covered population mean, and how does Broadband Ohio aim to reach out to those 8 groups of particularly impacted individuals?
Sure. So I think the first step is just identifying, we have, so veterans, we have a Department of Veteran Services for the state of Ohio. So just kind of starting with our state level entities that work with the covered populations, and then getting really down. And I think we have really good relationships with our city local officials, and then kind of just going down from there. And like I said, all the way to the community grassroots level of, and that's where we're going to depend on our stakeholders and our partnerships to really identify who in their communities are working with the covered populations. And I, like I said, I come from, grassroots work, and it's really, you have to get the buy-in from these groups to get, you want the best information and the best data possible. And, me sitting in Columbus, Ohio, I'm not going to be able to give you that data, right? So you really have to go to the source and to the nonprofits and the local governments and the schools and our libraries. Can't forget our libraries who are really doing incredible work right now and who have these connections with the covered populations.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think it's clearly this is delineated in the notice. This is part of the process. It's an extra effort to make sure that individuals who might be more at risk of not being included are part of a plan, a digital equity plan. I want to talk just a bit more. Please, we welcome your questions that more people are asking about. Where can they find these, right? Because again, it's just always when you're working on a plan, it's great to sort of see others. So we'll touch base afterwards, Amy, about making sure it's public, but we'll be happy to post this if it is fine with Ohio on Broadband Breakfast. Again, these are due in 6 days. So it's my hope and expectation that states are already making progress on these. But I want to talk just a bit about the 7 points that are necessary for this application. It sounds like you come from this grants field, Amy, so you've kind of got some familiarity with this, but there's literally just 6 requirements. This is in the NOFO, the Notice of Funding Opportunity from May 13th. I'm just reading on page 17. You need to have a description of the entity selected to serve as the administering entity. So in the case of Ohio, it's Broadband Ohio, a certification from the state that within 1 year of the award of these funds, you will have developed a state digital equity plan that complies with this section 60304C of the Infrastructure Act. You want to say a word or two about that digital equity plan and the requirements of it, Amy, that you're looking forward to a year from now?
Yep. So I think that, let me get my notes out here. I think that that's all part of the application process. And I think there's some statutory requirements that come from this application. And it's really, number one, identification of the barriers that the covered populations are facing in Ohio. And then the availability and the affordability of access to technology, what's going on with digital literacy with the covered population. So there is statutory requirements that the plan will have to cover. And obviously the state of Ohio plans on covering all of those statutory requirements. And then there's a lot of assessments that need to be done as well at the state level. So we need to include economic and workforce goals, education outcomes, health outcomes, and then, let's see, I'm trying to think of some of the other, including your community anchor institution. So there is, for just 1 year, there's a lot we have to cover. But I really believe that, just with, we'll have our stated vision for digital equity. I'm really confident that we'll be able to get this done in a year, but there's a lot of moving parts and pieces right now. And, the 500 or so characters that they give you in the narrative really don't cover it, but I get they have a lot that they're going to have to go through. But yeah, I think in a year, we will have all the statutory requirements done and all the additional requirements done as well.
Okay, wonderful. Well, again, and just before we went live, we were chatting about how, there's so many deadlines and so many moving parts that you have to you got your letter of intent in because you had what you needed. You got this in, and then you'll be moving next. What's the next thing you'll be moving to after this?
So next we'll be focusing on BEAD. Because there's planning dollars of a planning application for planning dollars for $5 million right now that is open as well. And then we're kind of doing this all at the same time, right? And I know other state offices can commiserate with that. We're small offices, but we have state priorities we have to focus on, and now we have these federal priorities. So we'll start. We've already started our application for BEAD as well, and then focusing on middle mile at the same time.
let's go back to this 6-point requirements for this planning grant that's due on Tuesday. We went over the fact that the entity certify that you will do your digital equity plan,
Sure.
assure that you're going to comply with the section on allowable and unallowable uses of these funds.
Sure.
So, and then you have the fourth item, a narrative describing the grant project. And your narrative was, a couple pages, right, Amy? This was a very short narrative, but it's basically the types of things that we've chatted about here, that we've talked about here. And then you've got the fifth item being the detailed budget and budget narrative. And it discusses that all budget information must support the dollar amounts identified in SF 424 and SF 424A. We hear those a lot. Tell us what the SF 424 and 424A are, Amy.
Sure. So SF 424 is kind of like if you think of like a cover page for a grant, it's who the applicant is, all of the federal numbers. You have to talk about what congressional districts you're applying for, who the contact staff is, and then you have to put in your dollar amount that you're requesting. So it's really just kind of general grant information and contact information. And then 424A is your a summary of your budget. So that is like kind of the cover page for your budget. And you have to fill that out. And then you have to submit a budget justification and a budget narrative as well.
And then, of course, the final element is just the actual forms, the standard grant forms, the 424, 424A, as well as other, non-lobbying and or disclosure of lobbying and other indirect costs. What else would you add to this detailed, painful?
Sure. So I think what I can just say from our experience is that some other states have seen that we did this, and we actually just got feedback that we couldn't do it. So we included for our personnel and for benefits, we included the staff person for 2 years and not 1 year. And that was something that was flagged by NTIA because, in our mind, the work isn't the planning work doesn't stop from the 1 year that you're given funding. So we tried to put 2 years of personnel and benefits in there, but it was flagged out. So that was kind of our one big piece of feedback that we've already received. And it's already been remedied down to 1 year. But I know that some other states have saw that and called Peter and to talk about it. But so we brought it back down to 1 year. But, the planning's not going to stop after that 1 year of funding is over.
Now we've got a question here. Feel free to put your questions forward here. We're talking today about the state, the Digital Equity Act planning grants. And Michelle Primer asks, state broadband office have 1 year to produce their digital equity plan, but when does the digital equity NOFO come out, or is there one? And I think the answer to that is it has come out. This is the May 13th document we've been talking about. It is the NOFO for the digital equity planning grant process. I'm presuming there will be another NOFO for the the state capacity program that's kind of on a later timeline. Do you want to add anything to that, Amy?
Yeah, all of the NOFOs that are out right now it's Internet for All .gov is the website that you can find all of the available grant programs and all of the documentation that's available right now.
And if you go to that site, you'll obviously see that the three that are out there that came out on the same day are the BEAD NOFO, the Middle Mile NOFO, and the state Digital Equity Act planning grant. Now, Michelle is clarifying that she's asking, well, will there be another NOFO for the digital equity?
Most likely, I believe there will be.
Yeah. I mean, if you look again on the timeline that I shared earlier, it does discuss the 1 year state planning grant process, going for this period of time, and then in 2024. State capacity applications will be launched within, it says competitive program launches within 1 month of first capacity awards. Yeah. So I'm not sure if you've gotten further instructions, Amy, but I'm presuming that, once the awards are made, and they could be made, anytime after July 12th, right?
Mhm.
Then you'll have the firing gun for the 1-year kickoff
Yeah.
of your state Digital Equity Act plan, but then the capacity grant program will launch. And again, presumably there will be a NOFO
Yeah.
that is followed. Anything you want to add on that?
So it won't be immediately after July 12th. I think in the NOFO, it says that, because I know there's kind of like 3 to 4 levels of review within the federal government. So I don't think we'll hear until September. We're planning on September 1. That's what we put as our start date. But yeah, I don't think we'll hear until September. And then I see that Sarah has a question about Virginia not submitting a
go ahead
letter.
and read that question and answer it if you don't mind.
Yeah, so it says, I see that my state, Virginia, has not submitted a letter of intent. Why would states choose not to apply for Digital Equity Act program with some states think they already have too much money? So you did not need a letter of intent for the digital equity planning dollars. If you were a tribal government or if you were a tribal government, you needed a letter of intent, but for the state digital equity planning, if you were a state, you did not. You needed a letter of intent for the BEAD planning dollars, which is a separate grant program. So no letters of intent for digital equity planning grant, but you did need them for the BEAD planning grant.
Great clarification. Dr. Suarez asks, Michigan still has not hired a single person for the state broadband office. Are letters of intent filed by states public? Links.
So I haven't seen any links for the state of, so there is, I'm going to put up, and you might be familiar with this, but Broadband USA has, they have a map of who has offices and who doesn't, and I think they give the contact information. So I will put this in the chat.
Go ahead and put that in the chat, and I will make sure it gets onto the page for this event. I would also point out that we have been working closely with our partner, broadband.money. Thank you for that link, Amy. That's a great link. This link here provides what we've been able to assemble about the state broadband offices. And we have Peter listed as the contact for Ohio as is appropriate. And for Michigan, to Ron's question, we have a person listed by the name of Judd Hertzer. Okay, so I don't know any more, Ron, about that, but if you want to follow up and get back to us, and we can, because again, this is important information. I mean, on the one hand, it's a little bit inside, so it's insidery because it's only the states that can apply for these, only the state broadband offices. But the state, you all, Amy, as the state broadband office, are going to be a key element, the key element in the BEAD program and the awards. So again, without losing our focus on the planning grants, do you want to talk a little bit about how you're looking to BEAD as the next step of the process?
Sure. So we are in the process of hiring on a consultant that will be the main. They'll do all the planning for the BEAD and help us with the BEAD planning. But we have, same with Middle Mile, there's a lot of brainstorming going on back and forth. We have our state grant program, but some of those requirements are obviously different and would require a legislation change if we did anything with that, with adopting with BEAD as well. So we are, we know we need a consultant, we know we need help, and we're just really in the early stages of the BEAD planning. But what I can say is please reach out to your broadband offices. There's not a lot of us in the office, so most likely there's like a general email you can contact. But throughout this whole process, I think that because we even want to hear with you were talking about the FCC challenge process, we want to hear from anyone who has a house that is not connected. We have been collecting data on our end, but we want to hear from everyone in every kind of capacity. Please be curious about what your state is doing regarding any of these 3 buckets of infrastructure bill. Ask questions. specifically for middle mile. If, you have a project that you are thinking about submitting for your middle mile, and you're not a state entity, please reach out to your state and let them know what you plan on doing. Just have, I just encourage you to reach out to your broadband office just so you can make that connection and know what's going on.
We have another comment here from Mark Goldstein. Mark's in Arizona. He's been on a Broadband Breakfast Live Online program. Thank you. And he's provided a link kind of supplementing what Amy provided. The link Mark provides goes to the list of state broadband leaders on the official NTIA website. So that's another point in addition to the broadband.money one for the reference to the state broadband offices. I thought I had another question, but I don't. I wanted to again invite our audience. We have just a few more minutes. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to raise them. I want to just highlight that again, going back to the Digital Equity Act is $2.75 billion of funds. That's part of that 45 billion or 65 billion in truth that's in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. The first of those three tranches of DEA money is the $60 million for state planning grants. That's what we've been talking about in this program with our guest, Amy from Broadband, Ohio. She's already put in the application for the 1.47 million that was predetermined by the NTIA. There's a second series of funds, the state capacity program, that in a NOFO to forthcoming NOFO, that will be 1.44 billion. So much more than the 60 million. And that'll again be for state broadband offices like Amy's to help fund programs for digital equity over 5 years. Then there is a competitive program, a $1.25 billion program that is for applicants, like separate and apart from the states. And again, this is down the road. NOFO is not yet out. In a similar way to how all BEAD applications need to go through state broadband offices, but the middle mile applications, those are due September 30th. So just around the corner from now. And those applications are going to be direct to NTIA. I see we have a couple more questions here. Let's.
There is a question about the formula again, and I just put the NOFO in the chat, and on page 5, it talks about the formulas and the breakdown of how they came up with like the percentages of total population, 25% of covered population, and then 25% of lack of availability and adoption. So that's in there as well.
So just to clarify, this is the formula for determining that amount, that 1 point
for digital equity.
For digital equity. So it's not a formula for the big 42 billion, but it's a formula for this small amount. Thank you for answering that question. Another question is from Dan Lawrence, who asks, so many of these grant programs are oriented to fiber to the home. What is the baseline service level to qualify for funding? Once again, Dan, this what we're talking about now is not a program for deploying broadband through fiber or wireless or other means. This is a planning grant program to ensure the state has a plan for using those tools of broadband. Do you want to say anything about the fiber question, Amy, or are you just happy to stay with
I'm trying to get to the BEAD, and I don't want to. So underserved is 25.3, and they're considering underserved populations 120. So that's kind of the minimum that the feds are using for the BEAD program.
Yeah. And we here at Broadband Breakfast have had many programs where we've talked about this unserved and underserved element. When I had the opportunity to interview Alan Davidson of the NTIA, asked specifically about this, and his answer was that effectively NTIA is looking to make sure everyone, unserved and underserved, gets access to 100 by 20 megabit per second broadband. That some people view that as kind of forcing fiber. It doesn't necessarily, because there are other technologies that can serve at 100 by 20 megabits per second broadband, but fiber is kind of the preferred, that is to say, default. But there are many ways that it can be overcome. There are many states that are going to have different programs, like Western states and this is something that NTIA said just at a conference I attended last week at Park City. What Delaware does for its plan is going to be different from what Wyoming does for its plan, right? And so I assume you're thinking about those questions of technologies. Amy,
Sure.
haven't
And
had to do anything about it yet.
And especially the states like Ohio that are so diverse. In the northern part of the state looks very different than the southern part of the state, and that creates difficulties as well with the speed requirement. So we are definitely very aware of the speeds, and I know they might be working on some sort of exemption process for areas that you just can't, because of the topography of the area and stuff like that. So especially for BEAD, this is just the planning process. And there is still a lot more information that we're going to need to get from the federal government to kind of put these processes together.
At the risk of trying to share one more thing, I want to just put a map up here that is of Ohio. And this is from your site, Amy, the Broadband Ohio map of Broadband Ohio projects. And you've got about 7 listed here, color coded. Again, let's give you a few minutes, take about 4 or 5 minutes to just speak about what are these projects that we're looking at here, and how do they relate to what you hope to be doing? For example, these 5 areas of the state that you talked about a little bit earlier.
So these are just these are separate from our grant program. These are kind of our first pilot projects that were created, and that some are still in the process, some are closed, but our East Cleveland connectivity pilot project is really focusing on with PCs for People, looking at neighborhoods in Cleveland that didn't have access and that were affordability issues. So that was connecting households with affordable internet access through PCs for People. Your Muskingum Valley Education Center and your telehealth pilot project. Those are 2 telehealth pilot projects that are still in the process. So that is connecting. So Muskingum Valley ESC in that green is, you could have one school on one side of the county, and it takes an hour and a half for their mental health professionals to get to another school in the county, like an hour to get there. So if there's a student in crisis, they looked for the technologies to make sure that if there is a student in crisis, the mental health provider could stay in that one school that they are already in and immediately serve the student in the other school that was having a mental health crisis. So that's really just connecting students and school districts with mental health services. And then our Mount Healthy Connectivity Pilot Project was we worked with Cincinnati Bell and Alta Fiber to connect the downtown core of Mount Healthy and some apartment buildings with public Wi-Fi. And then our Riverside is again connecting in Middletown, are connecting school districts and students with connectivity to their homes. And then the Marks Tower is just making sure our Marks Towers are more accessible for use. But yeah, that's kind of what we've been working on and doing.
Well, thank you for taking that time to discuss those projects. Do you have any closing words that you'd like to share with our audience about the state digital equity planning grant applications that are due 6 days from now?
Yeah, I just suggest, if you're a state, there's plenty of resources that they've posted that can help walk you through the application. If you're not a state and you are interested in what your state's doing, please don't hesitate to reach out to whoever is designated as your state office and just say, hey, what are you guys doing? Are you going for this money? And if so, can you let me know what your plan is? And just to have that connection going forward, because there's this historic amount of funding, and and, the states, I think, would be happy to share with what they're doing. And in full disclosure, a lot of states probably, just like we are, we're still in the planning process. And so they might not be as concrete answers as you'd want them to be, but just starting that open dialogue, I think is a really good idea.
Well, thank you again for being with us, for spending this almost an hour with us. We are here every Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern time, so invite you and your colleagues in other state broadband offices to join us. And thank you to our audience, both on Zoom and our other platforms. On behalf of Amy Elbor of Broadband Ohio, I'm Drew Clark with Broadband Breakfast. We'll see you next week. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.